saying good evening to everyone, and thank you very much to everyone for welcoming me back here for, oh, it's been quite a few years. I mean, with a couple of years of an interruption, but quite a few years that I've been coming, and you all have been hosting me, and you all have been doing your practice. You've been studying and helping people and bringing new members of the community into the Dharma. And keeping this group going and keeping these teachings of the precious Karma Kagyu lineage and Trungpa Rinpoche's going for all these years. And so I'm very happy to always come back. In our monastery in Nepal and India, everyone thinks that I come from Maine. So I guess we could say that this is this sort of second home. I mean, I'm sure that a real Mainer would not think that I come from Maine. I mean, a real Vermonter wouldn't even think I'm a Vermonter anymore either. So, let's begin this evening as usual with the Vajradhara lineage prayer. Oh, one moment, I have to do something before I start that. Get things ready. All right, so we'll begin by reciting oh, I'm sharing the wrong thing. One moment. Wrong window. There we go. Share that. Okay, so we will begin by reciting the Vajradhara lineage prayer. Tonight we'll do it in Tibetan, but over the weekend, this weekend and next weekend, we'll do it generally one session in Tibetan and one session in English. Khenpo David Rinpoche is very clear that when we recite, it's good to recite things in Tibetan because it was written in that. It's been sung in Tibetan and chanted in Tibetan for hundreds of years, since the 15th century, I believe. And so there's a certain blessing that comes with just the sounds of the Tibetan. But it's also good for us to understand them, so we're going to alternate between the Tibetan and English. So tonight we'll start in Tibetan. So please, let's recite this with faith and devotion. O Lord, Chanje, Tam Mila Chuje Gambo Du Som Che Kunja Gamba Che Shi Chanje Ju Nam Ju Tam So Sa Cha Che Na Nye Nyam So Se no tam se ta che gom che ma 예고 셈바 메바 르지 엔지 어 문지 소 신 메나데 Shin Kansha de ma de ga de gon chen na gon na Shin Jiya Namda Shena Jeba Jo Sanje Namgi Sambada Chera Jita Valche Jun Tomo Tebai Chugi Kolo Kordo Zo Me Jin The Dharma Expanse Palace of Akanishta is the essence of all Buddhas of the three times, who shows me directly in my mind is Dharmakaya. I prostrate to the glorious exalted Guru. Please bless me and all beings that our minds become the Dharma. Please bless us that the Dharma become the path. Please bless us that the path dispel confusion. Please bless us that confusion arise as wisdom. And so now to begin, the first thing we need to think about anytime we do anything, but in particular when we do Dharma activities, the first thing to think about is our motivation. I mean, many of you have heard me say this before, but really what the quality of the result of what we do tonight, what we're doing right now, really depends upon our motivation. And what sort of a result it's going to lead to. And the results it leads that this action that we're doing, this virtuous action of listening to and teaching the Dharma, the result of that depends upon our motivation. Because if you think about it, if your aim is to do something grand, then you're going to do it. You're going to find a way to do it. If your aim is to do something kind of nice for a little while, then you're probably not going to ever be able to do anything more than that's just what nice for a little while. And so when we think about it in terms of our situations, we are here in this world, in this lifetime, and we can do things to help ourselves in this lifetime. And that's, of course, excellent. It's necessary to do things to help yourself in this lifetime. But what comes next? What are we going to do next? If we don't do anything to prepare for that, then what's going to happen to us? And so we need to do things in this lifetime to make sure that at the time of death and as we go on from death, that we're going to be okay. And that depends upon training our minds now. But just thinking, oh, I want to be okay in the next lifetime is not enough to think, actually, because in the next lifetime, who knows where we're going to be and what it's going to be like, and whether we'll have the opportunity to do any spiritual practice or not. And so it's better to even think to ourselves about, well, can I do something to actually achieve freedom? I mean, is there a possibility of achieving freedom from the cycle of birth and death that we call samsara? And if you think there is, and the Buddha taught that there is, and you have some confidence that there is, and you work towards that, if that's your goal, then you're going to be able to do it. It's possible. People have done it. People are still doing it. It's quite possible for us to achieve liberation from samsara. But then if we achieve liberation from samsara for ourselves, but we leave everyone else behind, and we say, okay, I'm going to go off and hang out in nirvana and then leave everyone else suffering, then that's a little bit selfish. I mean, it's not that it's bad. I mean, it's just a little bit selfish. And so to think, well, what can we do? And actually if we think about the example of the Bhagavan Buddha, the Buddha Shakyamuni, who appeared in this world 2,600 years ago, awoke to enlightenment and turned the wheel of Dharma. Well, he was originally just a person like us, but he had the idea, I want to do this. I want to become a Buddha. And so if we also have that same motivation, and we also try to become a Buddha ourselves, and we have that motivation, we work to it, we try to make that like a focus of what we're doing, and gradually, it takes time. It can take many lifetimes, but that's not so important as just working towards it step by step to eventually achieve Buddhahood. So if we have that motivation, then it's possible that we're going to be able to do that. If our motivation is to just help ourselves in this lifetime, it's not going to work. The difficulty is that sometimes, it's hard to tell what our motivation really is, and we're just not sure about. So the point is I think, to look at where your motivation is and try to have as good a motivation as you possibly can. The best motivation is the motivation of what we call bodhicitta, the motivation of wishing to achieve Buddhahood for the sake of beings. But having the wish to achieve liberation from samsara is not a bad motivation, nor is the wish to better yourself in this lifetime and future lifetimes. These are all good motivations. So please try to listen this evening with, if possible, the motivation of bodhicitta, and if not, then at least the motivation of really wanting to do something positive for yourself and others. And one moment, I just noticed something here. Oh, okay, that's better. So, so please listen with a good motivation. And so the Dharma that we are listening to now is The Way of the Bodhisattva by Shantideva. So Shantideva was, what was this, 7th century Indian? Was it 7th or 8th? 7th century, I believe. I should have reminded myself beforehand, before looking at this. He was a 7th century Indian master who, what was he? He was a little bit of a, he went off to become a monk, and he went to Nalanda Monastery. And they, just to kind of remind you of the basic story, he was a little bit, when he got there, everyone else at Nalanda was like, that's like one of the original universities in the world. It was a great center of learning, and everyone there worked very hard at study. It's kind of like the, I don't know, Harvard and Oxford or whatever, of that time. And he went there and he just sort of sat around and did nothing. And so all of the other people, they gave him a nickname. They called him Busuku. So Bu means to eat. It's from the word to eat. Su means to sleep. And then Ku means to poop. They called him eat, sleep, poop, basically, Busuku. Because he was just sitting around doing nothing. He wasn't studying. He wasn't doing anything. And this is just not what you did at Nalanda. At Nalanda, you should be diligent and work at your studies. So Shantideva, so they tried to think of a way, what can we do to get rid of Shantideva? And they decided, well, he can't know anything. He's just too lazy all the time. So what can we do to kind of scare him off? Now, they had a tradition at Nalanda that a different monk would be chosen each week to give a teaching. And so they decided, well, let's set Busuku up to give a teaching. And then not only did they set him up to give a teaching, they announced it to everyone. And so this huge crowd gathered because he was like known for being incredibly lazy. And they made this huge throne that he had to get on to teach. And so he got to the throne and he walked up to it, and then suddenly he was on top of the throne, and no one could see how he actually got on top of the throne. They began to suspect something was going on. And then he asked them, would you like me to teach Dharma that you've heard before, or Dharma that you haven't heard before? And they really began to wonder. They said, well, let's listen to something we haven't heard before. And so then Shantideva began to recite this text, The Way of the Bodhisattva, from beginning to end. Now, some people say that he'd already written this and had just memorized it. Of course, at that day, in that time, memorizing was very common, and people could memorize tons of material, volumes worth of stuff, because they did it all the time. We get lazy. We use our smartphones, and we can't remember anything. Or we have books, and we can't remember anything. But in those days, there were manuscripts, handwritten manuscripts, but they were rare. And so you really had to memorize a lot. So he recited it. Either he recited it from memory after he'd written, or some authors say that he actually composed it on the spot and did the whole thing, quoting from sutras, summarizing the teachings of Mahayana Buddhism very beautifully. And then when he got to this 9th chapter, and when we got to the 32nd or 33rd verse, then he started to levitate up into the sky, went further and further into the sky until he disappeared, but everyone could still hear his voice reciting the text. Now, in that assembly, there were a lot of great scholars who had trained themselves in dhyana meditation and had the power of what we call the dharani, or of the retention of not forgetting anything. Basically, like a photographic memory. They could hear something once and they would remember it. And so they got together and they wrote it down, but there are two competing versions. And then eventually they sent someone to look for Shantideva, and then he said it was the longer version, and that's the version that's been passed down to us in the Tibetan tradition today. And so this version, it's been a classic. Ever since it was first taught, people recognized what an amazing text it was and how succinctly it really describes the entire Bodhisattva path in a fairly short text. I mean, 1,000, well, we say 1,000 verses, it's actually 930 or 950, something like that. But it's a very succinct encapsulation of the entire Mahayana path and Mahayana Buddhism. So it was very well loved in India. It spread throughout Southeast Asia. It spread into Indonesia, which at that time, in the second half of the first millennium, was a Buddhist country. There were a lot of Buddhist centers there. And then it also spread up into Tibet. It didn't spread into China so much because at that time, the transition of Buddhism into China had more or less finished by that time. There were some political problems in China, so there weren't as much contact directly between India and China after the 6th century. So from the 7th century, when Shantideva taught this, because he taught it after those connections were had more or less finished, then it didn't really get transferred into China so much. But it became very important throughout the rest of Southeast Asia and Tibet, South Asia and India. And it was very popular in India, even through the end of Buddhism in India, before Buddhism was wiped out in India. So that's the historical background. I think I went through this in the first year that we went over this. And so this text has been passed down, and in the Tibetan tradition in particular, it's one of the most beloved texts that everyone studies. The Dalai Lama speaks about it. He often teaches this text. Some people joke that there are more or less 3 texts that the Dalai Lama teaches. One is the Stages of Meditation by Kamalashila. One is the Lamp for the Path of Enlightenment by Adisha, and then the third is The Way of the Bodhisattva. And it's true, he often teaches these 3 texts. There are a few other that he throws in from time to time, but he really does teach this text quite often. And he said that this is the text, it's because of this text that he began to have some understanding of bodhicitta. It's a very important text in the tradition, and it's passed down in all the Tibetan traditions. And now it's coming into English. Of course, we already have several English translations, and so what do we say? So we are going to continue with our teaching of this text this year. Now, so this text, in general, The Way of the Bodhisattva, has 10 different chapters. And I was trying to think back when it was. It must have been, I think, 2000, and was it 2016 or 2017 that we started here? Then the first year that we went through it, we talked about the first 3 chapters and then also the last chapter on dedications. Then the next year we spoke about the 4th and the 5th chapters. The year after that we talked about most of the 6th chapter, but not all of it. Then I was planning to come back to teach the 6th chapter the next year, but of course the pandemic hit. And we did it online, I think, that winter, wasn't it? We finished the 6th chapter and did the 7th chapter. So last year, I was able to come and we could have the teaching on the 8th chapter, which we also did over 2 weekends. And so this year we are having our last teaching, and we only have 1 chapter remaining, the 9th chapter, because we've already spoken about the 10th chapter, although not everyone was there. So we'll see how time goes, and perhaps we might have some time to talk in brief about the 10th chapter on dedications at the end of this, because it's also a very important chapter. So it has 10 chapters, and we're discussing the 9th. Now, if you look at it, that's one way of looking at it. We've got the 10 chapters, but another way of looking at the text is that there's a famous Tibetan prayer. May bodhicitta, great and precious, arise in those who haven't roused it. Not weaken and never weakening in those who have, may it grow ever more and more. So you've got 4 things. You've got bodhicitta, the wish to bring all sentient beings to enlightenment. And so may those beings who haven't yet developed bodhicitta, may they develop it. May they, once they've developed it, may it not weaken. And then not only should it not weaken, but it also has to get stronger and stronger. So if you look at it, actually the way the Bodhisattva talks about how to do this. The first 3 chapters are all about taking the Bodhisattva vow, how to make the commitment to say, I'm going to become a Buddha. I'm going to do whatever I can to become a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings, so that they can all achieve Buddhahood. As it says at the very end of the 3rd chapter, I invite all sentient beings as my... Today, in the presence of all the protectors, I invite all sentient beings as my guests to Buddhahood and happiness till then. May gods and demigods and everyone rejoice. So this is that's the first 3 chapters, rousing bodhicitta. Then you want to be able to keep your bodhicitta. Well, the main problem for keeping bodhicitta is that we have a lot of bad habits. And those bad habits get us to think in wrong ways. And then when you think in wrong ways, you act in wrong ways. So you need to be careful. So the next chapter teaches carefulness. And then the chapter after that is the chapter that teaches discipline. It's called a chapter on awareness, but it's really primarily teaching discipline. And then the other problem we have, especially for bodhisattvas, if you're practicing the bodhisattva path, where you have to have compassion for all sentient beings, the other problem that comes up is that you get angry. And when you get angry, then there's a grave danger that you're going to violate your bodhisattva vow. So you have to practice patience. So that's the 6th chapter. So these 3 are all about preserving the bodhicitta that we already have. But then we need to increase our bodhicitta. Well, if you want to increase your bodhicitta, then you need to work at it. That's diligence. Being enthusiastic about it. Actually working at it's the kind of external manifestation. The real point is thinking, I really want to do this. I'm excited to do this. I have to do it. So as it says in their diligence, in the 7th chapter, diligence is a zest for virtue. Feeling like I really want to do virtuous things, do good things to help other sentient beings, right? And that impels you to, overcome your laziness and then actually commit yourself and do things to help other sentient beings. But if you don't have control over your mind, then that's not so good. So you have to practice meditation. And so that's the 8th chapter, the chapter on dhyana. Now, dhyana, this is a Sanskrit word. It's often translated, often we talk about this as the chapter on meditation. It's actually talking about dhyana, which is a specific type of meditation. It's like shamatha meditation. So if you've come here and done the practice sessions on weekly, you've probably been introduced to some shamatha meditation. This is basically shamatha meditation, but in the way of the Bodhisattva, it primarily doesn't teach shamatha meditation. Instead, it teaches the meditations on relative bodhicitta, because when you meditate on relative bodhicitta, it really helps you concentrate and focus your mind. So it has that aspect of shamatha, but it also has the aspect of insight. Insight being the one you have a stable mind, and then you can actually look and see more clearly the nature of things. This is called insight in English, or we could say vipassana in Sanskrit, Hakton in Tibetan. So that's the 8th chapter, is primarily teaching the methods of meditation, relative bodhicitta, in order to achieve stability of mind, according to some interpretations. So that brings us to the 9th chapter, the chapter on Prajna. So I'll get to the meaning of the word Prajna in a couple of moments. But basically this chapter on Prajna, if you look at it in another respect, it's like teaching insight meditation. What do you have to have insight into? What is the nature of things? And so there are different levels. Basically, when we're talking about insight, if you look at if we think about just the meaning of the English word, it's like being able to see more deeply into something, see its nature better. Insight is when you realize something, realize the nature. So here in this chapter, what we're talking about in particular is the ultimate nature of how things actually are, to the extent that they are. What the actual nature of things is, to the extent that you can speak about it. And so it's talking about insight meditation. Now the problem is insight actually doesn't necessarily, you actually have to have a little bit of insight even to begin practicing the Buddhist path. To have the idea, oh, I want to achieve Buddhahood for sentient beings, which is already actually even a somewhat advanced idea. Even to have that idea, you have to have some understanding of the nature of reality, right? When you want to do shamatha meditation, even when you haven't studied anything about Buddhism, and you first come to a Dharma center or meditation place, and you start doing meditation, you have to have a little bit of understanding in order to be able to do that shamatha meditation, right? So you have to have insight at the very beginning. And then as you have a little bit of insight, then you can do shamatha meditation that's a little bit more stable. You gain more insight, and like when you're doing shamatha meditation at the beginning, the way we do it in the West is we start out doing shamatha meditation. People realize how their thoughts move in their mind, that they don't necessarily have to follow them. That's insight, right? And then as you gain that insight, then your meditation becomes more stable. And then you go through the successive stages of meditation. And as you go through them, your insight grows a little bit and your meditation grows a little bit. So they work together as you're going through. So in a sense, when we're talking about meditation, you have to have both the insight and the stability at the same time. So the insight, the realization comes from our prajna, our understanding of the basic nature. The stability comes from shamatha meditation. You have to have both. If you don't have both, you can't really focus on the nature of mind. You can't really focus on the nature of things or the nature of mind. Like when we're doing Mahamudra meditation, whether we're following the instructions that Rinpoche gives or that Mingyur Rinpoche gives or all the other Kagyu masters, Sita Rinpoche, it's all the same. In essence, different words, but all the same. So when you are doing your Mahamudra meditation, actually with the biggest danger that we have in Mahamudra meditation is that you enter a zoned out state that's subtly conceptual and you don't realize it. You think you're resting in the nature of the mind, and there is some glimmer of slightly conceptual understanding that you're not able to break through. But you think you're there because it's kind of like lovely or nice, and you think you've got realization of the nature of the mind. At that point, you actually really need to keep working and keep looking and keep trying to develop your insight. And the best is to do it in, working with a guru who can bring you through and who can ask you the hard questions to see whether or not you understand or not. It takes a lot of work at that point. The problem there is that you've got a very strong shamatha meditation, but your prajna is weak. On the other hand, if you want to do Mahamudra meditation, you have very strong prajna, but you don't have any stability of mind. You start trying to do the Mahamudra meditations, and you say, oh, you have to look at your mind and see if it's like this or that, the instructions that the guru's given. I'm not going to repeat them now because I'm not a qualified guru. Oh, I have to look at the nature of my mind, and you start looking, and you can only look for a fraction of a second because you have no stability, right? So you have to have stability. You have to have both the insight and the stability. They have to work together. So like a bird cannot fly if it does not have two wings. An airplane cannot fly if it does not have two wings. And so you have to have both your shamatha and your insight if you're going to be able to do the meditation. So we're going to be primarily talking about the aspect of insight. In particular, what do we need to understand? What do we need to know? What is it that we need to come to learn as we do our meditation? So what is the ultimate nature? Now, when we talk about Dzogchen and Mahamudra and all these other meditation techniques, and we do talk about them a fair amount in this and in other Dharma centers in the Tibetan tradition, sometimes we think, well, you just need to sit and do that. You don't need to worry about study. And you think that it's actually somewhat different than what we're studying here, because it's looking directly at the nature of mind. This is using the path of inference or so forth. This is what Trungpa Rinpoche often says. Actually, what we are studying in this chapter is no different than the nature of mind that is discussed in the Mahamudra teachings. Mikya Dorje, the 8th Karmapa Mikya Dorje, writes about this very clearly in the opening of his long text on the Madhyamaka, on the middle way. It's a different text, but it's essentially the same teachings as we have in this chapter. That basically you're talking about Mahamudra. It's just a different name, different way of looking at it. It's not different. It's the same as we're talking about the same thing as Mahamudra, the same thing as Dzogchen, the same thing as Buddha nature or whatever. It's all the same thing, just looking at it, explaining it in different ways of looking at it. And in particular, the way that we're looking at it in this context is a way of trying to overcoming all our clinging. Because what prevents us from seeing the nature of things as they really are is our clinging to how things appear to us and what we think they are. So we need to break through that clinging. And so here you use the logical methods and use your mind and understanding to come to an understanding of what the nature of things actually is, so that then when you're doing your meditation, you can go and say, oh, that's it. Or you're doing your meditation and say, oh, maybe this isn't quite right because this teaching the Madhyamaka, what is it? And then you investigate it more. If you haven't studied these and you're just sort of going, it's just easy to end up in kind of a blank conceptual state that in the end does not do you any good. So it's really important to have the understanding that comes from the study of the middle way, the study of emptiness. But when we talk about this study of emptiness, this is actually one that many people kind of feel a little bit, what do we say? People are a little bit scared of it. It sounds like it's really difficult. And you think about it, and we hear emptiness, and people talk about Madhyamaka, and they talk about how difficult it is, and how and all this. And actually, when it really comes down to it, the basic points of the middle way are actually very simple. But the problem with these basic points of the middle way is that they go completely contrary to our normal ways of thinking. So in the middle way, the big problem is overcoming your own clinging. Now, the other problem is the parts that are difficult when you're studying the Madhyamaka or the middle way are the parts where they're refuting other schools and other viewpoints. And if you don't know those viewpoints, then it's hard to understand what the heck they're talking about. Still, the basic understanding of the Madhyamaka is, or the middle way, the basic point is not so difficult. So there's no need to be afraid of it. It's actually, I mean, anyone who's gotten an advanced degree has probably studied things that are more difficult than this. I mean, frankly. But this is actually difficult to realize. It's also difficult for us to go beyond an intellectual understanding. And in order to go beyond an intellectual understanding, we have to have that motivation of bodhicitta. So it's really important to start with that motivation of bodhicitta. So let me see if I can get out of that. What is going on here? There we are. So in this chapter on the on transcendent prajna, it first begins with, what is it? Yes, that's it. Okay. So the ninth chapter, Transcendent Prajna. So those of you who don't have it on your screen, but we can see it on this TV screen up here. Maybe I should have made bigger letters, but sorry, too late now. Anyways, the chapter opens in the first verse by telling us about the benefits of prajna, because the first thing before you're going to try to study the middle way, you have to have some reason, some understanding of why it's important to do so. What are the benefits of prajna? Excellent. Excellent. Put this out where everyone can see. So we have to have some, because if you understand what the benefits are, then it will be more easier for you to gain some sort of, have some enthusiasm about studying. So what are the benefits of studying prajna? So it's as it says here, sage taught all these preparations for the sake of prajna. So those who wish to pacify suffering should develop prajna. So the very first two lines are saying the sage taught all these preparations for the sake of prajna. So the word preparations, what does this refer to? Well, when we went through the first several chapters of where the Bodhisattva, after you've talked about rousing bodhicitta, then it talks about the 6 transcendences, or the 6 paramitas. The 6 transcendences. You've got transcendent generosity, transcendent discipline, transcendent patience, transcendent diligence, transcendent dhyana. So these 5. And the sage, that means the Buddha, taught all of these in order to prepare us as their preparations so that we can develop prajna. So after you go through practicing, the reason for practicing them is that if you want to develop prajna, you have to do these first. So they're like the way we can, the way we get into practicing. So if we think about it, it's like one of the big problems with realizing the nature of things is that we're attached to things. So what is one good way of getting over our attachment to things is actually learning how to give away the things we like. Generosity, right? If you're too stingy about things, you're too attached, your attachment is too strong. So you overcome some attachment to give things away. Or we are attached to things that bring us temporary pleasure but cause pain in the long term. And so we end up doing things that violate discipline, right? So if you have some discipline of refraining from harmful actions, even though they might be enjoyable in the short term or might seem to give you a temporary pleasure, well, that's overcoming some clinging also. And patience, overcoming the anger that disturbs your mind so you can't see things. And then diligence, developing the strength of mind to be able to really devote yourself to practice, and then the jhana, the stable meditation, to be able to actually rest and understand. So all of these in this way are like preparations that bring us to be able to realize prajna, right? So prajna is the goal. So prajna, what do we mean by prajna? The prajna is a Sanskrit word. Now, it's often translated in English as the word wisdom. I've translated it as prajna. Many translators into English have used the word prajna. Quite a few use the word wisdom. Using the word prajna here is at the recommendation of the Gyalon Karmapa. Basically, what word do I use? Some people use this, some people use that. Which one do I use? Easy way to get an answer, just ask and do what he says, right? I don't have to worry about these things. So, it's just ask. And he said I should use the word prajna because prajna, it's a little bit, there's a slight difference it's a little bit more specific than just wisdom in general. Prajna is in particular, it's the ability to see what is and what is, the ability to distinguish what is and what is not. The practice of what is dharma and what is not dharma. What should I do or what should I not do? So it has varying levels of prajna. And actually we have prajna in all of our different, it's actually accompanies every cognition that we have. Every time in your mind, there's prajna. It might be pretty weak. You might be doing something stupid and it might be pretty weak. Or you might be disregarding it because of your attachments, but it's there. So we all have prajna. So when we look at prajna, actually, there are different types of prajna. And one way of looking at prajna is that there is like innate prajna, or that we have just from birth. All of us have this, and especially as humans, we have a greater degree of prajna than, well, I have to be careful because we really can't tell. I mean, we could say, I was going to say jellyfish, but I really don't know anything about the cognitive capacities of jellyfish. I thought to myself, I really shouldn't say octopus because there's a lot of people who think that that octopus are really quite intelligent. But we do have a specific quality of intelligence that differentiates us from other types of beings, like most animals. And even with other animals that are very intelligent, whether they have the intelligence that allows them to tell what is dharma and what is not dharma is something we don't know. We can't tell because we don't have that capacity. But we know that as humans, we have it to some degree. Sometimes we have more intelligence, sometimes we have less. So prajna is like a type of intelligence. Even when you have someone who's doing something, that takes a lot of intelligence, but it's not necessarily beneficial, is a degree of prajna. For example, Elon Musk has a fair degree of prajna in some things, but not necessarily in everything. Now, I don't know anything about his own spiritual life or anything like that, so I'm not going to make any complaints, any claims. But it's clear that he's got a certain amount of prajna to be able to start all these countries and send rockets to blow up whatever they're going to do, you know. So he's got a lot of intelligence. He's got a certain degree of prajna. Now, how is he using it? I can't really say. But we also have prajna, right? So we also have it. So there's that prajna that we have. But there are different degrees of it. Some people have more rather than less. So there's a second type of prajna, which is the type of prajna you can develop. It's like, so basically what this means, you come into this world with a certain amount of prajna that's just there from birth, and then you can do something to develop it. And so that's what we're really interested in here, because we all have a certain degree of prajna. We all have a certain degree of discernment to be able to know what is right and what is wrong, what is and what is not. But we don't yet have enough prajna to awaken to Buddhahood. So we all have to develop our prajna. And so when we're going to develop our prajna, our ability to distinguish what is dharma and what is not dharma from what is not dharma, then we have to do this in three different ways. This is reminding me of a verse that I was in a translation I was working on the other day. But I won't look it up because it'll take too much time, and I haven't got it memorized because I haven't finished the translation. At any rate, the three different ways are through like listening, contemplating, and meditating. So you've got three different ways to develop your prajna. The first of these ways is that you listen to Dharma teachings and you think about them, and then you can develop develop some understanding through that. You listen to the teacher and you think, oh, they're speaking, they're saying something right. He's saying something right. She's saying it doesn't. Whoever, you know, they're saying something. I understand. That's understanding. It's good. And then that alone is not enough, because if just hearing Dharma teachings were enough to bring us to Buddhahood, we could recite the Heart Sutra and be awakened. But it's not enough. Right? So you have to think about it. You have to contemplate it, really work it, think it through. Is it really so? You cannot take anyone's word for it to say, it must be so because Trungpa Rinpoche said so, Mingyur Rinpoche said so, the Gyalwang Karmapa said so, or Khenpo David said so. Really don't believe me, especially. You have to think for yourself. And you need to examine things for yourself to see, is this the case? Use your logic. And then, you know, if you have some questions and you speak to someone more senior or someone like me or whoever, you ask questions and you try to develop and figure out where things are, and you develop that. And that thinking is what we call the listening prajna of contemplation. And then you begin to meditate on that. When you have certainty in it, then you meditate on it. And as you meditate, then you develop more understanding, direct understanding through your meditation. That's called the prajna born of meditation. So we have to go through these three steps of developing the prajna. And then eventually the prajna gets to the point where we no longer have any conception of there being a subject or an object, existence, non-existence, and so forth, when we realize emptiness, and then it becomes transcendent prajna. So that's the prajna that we're trying to develop as we do this. And now the reason why we want to develop this prajna is because we're suffering in samsara. So if we're suffering in samsara, then as it says here, those who wish to pacify suffering should develop prajna. It's only through our understanding of the world that we're going to be able to really free ourselves from samsara. If we don't understand, the problem that keeps us in the world is essentially our ignorance. And so if you are ignorant, then the only way to overcome your ignorance is to learn, to know, to come to know something. And so that's why we need to develop prajna. And so when we've developed that prajna, then we will be able to, Then we'll be able to gradually overcome all the different types of suffering. And as we develop prajna, it comes in stages. And first it's kind of things calm down, and then you might feel like you're more easily able to deal with situations. And then you come to the point where you really see the equality of all phenomena, and then you really see it and have real realization. And eventually, so it gets better and better. It grows over time as we go through the stages. At the beginning, we have a certain degree of understanding. It gets deeper. We get conviction. We meditate upon it. Then you see the actual nature. Then you go through the nature, go through the meditation until you achieve Buddhahood. So, and at that point, you completely can overcome all of your suffering. So that's the reason why we study Prajna, or why we try to develop Prajna. Now, as we're trying to develop Prajna, the first thing we need to do is we think about, well, what are we trying to understand? Well, we're trying to understand the true nature of things. So what are the different types of truths that we have? And so the next passage of the text talks about proving that the two truths are emptiness. And so before you're going to talk about the two truths being emptiness, the first thing you have to understand is, what are the two truths? And so here, this is the second stanza. It says, the relative and ultimate are stated to be the two truths. The ultimate is not mind sphere. It's said that mind is relative. So here we're talking about two truths, the relative and the ultimate. Relative truth and the ultimate truth. So what are these? Well, the relative truth is basically all of the different phenomena that we perceive and see, that we interact with on a daily life, all the phenomena of our existence, all the phenomena of nirvana, everything we can see or talk about, everything that appears to us, that looks to us like it is there. That's relative truth. And then the ultimate truth is the nature of things. So the relative truth, the reason why it's, the relative is the English term. So relative is like, one thing related to another. It's kind of relative. So we usually use the word relative truth. The Sanskrit word, and then also the Tibetan word. So the Sanskrit word is samvriti. Samvriti, the word sam means like all, like everything. It's like all the different phenomena, right? And then the word vritti means hiding, fake, false, misleading. So it's basically saying you've got all and then fake and misleading, it's saying completely fictitious. So there are these appearances that appear to us, that look to us like mountains, houses, people, roads, cars, and so forth, animals. We have these appearances that look to us in a certain way, and we think that they are real and true as they appear to us. And so in this way, it is false, because they are not true the way they appear to us. They look to us like they're lasting, real things. We grasp at things as being permanent, as being a single thing, but they're not really. And so that is a false understanding of things. But it happens consistently. Relatively, in the relative truth, there's causes and effects. If you strike a match and you strike it right and it's not wet and all the conditions are right, that match will catch fire. Fire will produce smoke. When you see smoke, you know that there must have been fire. That cause and effect is unfailing in the terms of relative appearances. But is there something real about that cause and effect? Is there a real cause? Is there a real effect? There's not, but it appears. So the appearances that we see, all the appearances of everything in existence, all the appearance of everything in nirvana, all of this is the relative truth, right? So it's appearance. The ultimate truth is that when you examine all of the things, all the phenomena that appear to us, you cannot find something that exists. You can't find something that does not exist. You cannot find anything permanent. You can't find anything impermanent. You can't find anything single. You can't find anything separate. You can't find any self. You can't find any other. None of it can be established as being anything. So when you look at the nature of these experiences and of the appearances that we perceive, you cannot find any real nature in any of them. They cannot be perceived. And in essence, you can't actually see the phenomena. There's the appearance, but the nature is nothing. That's what we call the ultimate truth. The Sanskrit word for ultimate truth is paramartha. That's paramartha satya. So paramartha. So param means like the highest, the greatest, the best. And why is it the best? Because it's the truth that will lead us to Buddhahood. Artha is a very interesting word and a very difficult word to translate into English. Very, very hard. And there are actually, in one sense, you can think about it as like it's the goal. It's the aim. The ultimate aim is to realize this nature. It is the nature, and so it's the purpose. So that's the highest purpose. That's one way of looking at it. Or you can say that it is like it's a way in to realize the nature. It is like we're referring to the actual meaning of the ultimate. So it's like that, the highest meaning, the highest nature. So that's what we're meaning. It's something that you cannot find, you cannot see. The more you examine, the less you can see of it. This is the ultimate nature. And these two are actually both the same. It's not like saying that the ultimate truth is ultimately true. If it's ultimately true, then there's something that has the character, that has the property of being ultimately. It has the property of being true. But there's nothing there that has that property of being ultimately true. When the Buddhas look at the ultimate truth, they cannot find anything. They cannot see anything. There's nothing to be seen. The Buddhas, whether a Buddha appears in the past or whether it hasn't, it does not change the nature. The Buddha said, I do not see it. I have not seen it. I will not see it. It's a nature that is very difficult. It's something we cannot conceive. So we call it the ultimate truth, but ultimately even the Buddhas cannot see an ultimate truth. So when we call it by the term ultimate truth, we're actually just calling that in comparison to the relative truth on our own, because we're still working on a level of relative truth. So we have to have some term to distinguish it from our ordinary experiences. Right. So the ultimate, basically the way to understand it is that the ultimate truth is the appearance. The relative truth is the appearance, and the ultimate truth is the empty nature, as it says and these two are united. You can't separate the one out from the other. It's like it says in the Heart Sutra, form is empty. Emptiness also is form. Form is not other than emptiness. Emptiness is not other than form. These two go together. Form and emptiness, you can't separate. Or appearance and emptiness, you can't separate them. So if you're looking for the ultimate nature, you're not going to find it anywhere else than in the appearances of samsara or of nirvana, whichever is appearing to you. You're only going to find it in the appearances. It's not like it's somewhere else. So like the relative truth is the appearance, the ultimate truth is the actual nature of the appearances. Sometimes people will say, teachers will say, and this is kind of like a way to let people in, you could think about it, that we say relatively things exist. Ultimately, they do not. This is one way it's sometimes described. And this is a way that helps people come to a better understanding, but that's only a partial understanding. Because if you say that relatively they exist and ultimately they do not, then these two are exclusive of each other, because it can't both exist and not exist. And in that way, you're divorcing the relative from the ultimate. Actually, the two are unified. So it's like you've got the nature of the appearance, and the appearance, its nature is that there is no nature. There's nothing there. There's not nothing either. There's no thing. There's no nothing. There's no both. There's no neither. There's the ultimate nature. So this is the relative and the ultimate truth. So the important points here are two things. If you can think about the relative refers to our appearances, ultimate refers to their actual nature. In Mahamudra speak, we talk about this as the union of appearance and emptiness, right? You probably have heard people speak about this if you've had Mahamudra teachings. So this is the relative. So these are taught to be the two truths. And then as the verse continues, the ultimate is not mind sphere. It's said that mind is relative. So the ultimate truth is not mind sphere. So what this means is that the ultimate truth is not something you can conceive of with your conceptual mind. It's not something you can perceive with your senses. It's beyond any dualistic cognition. It's beyond words. It's beyond thought. It's beyond conception. It's not something you can think of or conceive of, because when you're thinking or conceiving, then you're automatically switching into the relative truth. As it says, it's said that mind is relative. So here the word mind refers to all of our cognitions. This is actually, this is a point. A lot of the other translations of the way of the Bodhisattva, instead of saying mind, they say intellect. In the Tibetan word, in Tibetan, the word for here is lo, which is a translation of one of two Sanskrit words. The first word is buddhi, and the second word is di. If the original Sanskrit word were di, then it would be clearly it would be intellect. But since it's buddhi in Sanskrit, we know that it actually means mind. And also the Panjika, the commentary on the difficult points by Prajna Karmati also specifies that it refers to all the different types of cognition. So you can't see the ultimate with your eyes. You cannot understand it or think about it or talk about it with your intellect. It's beyond the intellect. It's beyond our sensory perception. I mean, it's not that when we are looking at it with our sensory perception, it's actually not that it's not appearing to us. It's more that our cognitions, our sensory cognitions, are so dualistic that we're seeing it in the wrong way. It's not something other than what we're seeing. It's just that we're not able to see it. We're not able to recognize it in our sensory cognition. So the relative talks about the mind. The relative, anything that the mind can engage is relative. That which is inconceivable, ineffable, inexpressible is the ultimate truth, the transcendent prajna. So that is the ultimate truth of mind. And I'm looking at the time. So this is the two truths. And so so when we talk about these two truths, if we want to prove, the next passage talks about the relative and the ultimate truth, talks about proving the ultimate relative and the ultimate truth. And one of the problems is that there are actually many different teachings in Buddhism that talk about the ultimate truth. And every different school has its own different presentation of the ultimate truth. So what is the ultimate truth? What really is the ultimate truth? And so in general, we can distinguish between two different types of people, as it says here in verse 3. With those two types of people are seen the yogic and the ordinary. Of these two, ordinary people are confuted by the yogic. So in the beginning, it says with those, with the ultimate and the relative truth, you can see that there are two different types of people. They're the yogic. So the yoga people are people who have realized emptiness. That's what we mean by yogis here. Yogis, male, female, whatever. So yogis are people who have been able to perceive emptiness. They have developed the meditation where they're able to rest in the nature of emptiness. And then you've got the ordinary people, and they're the regular people like us, worldly people who haven't understood everything. So of these two, ordinary people are confuted by the yogic. So that means that yogis have a better understanding. So if the ordinary person says, you're wrong, what you're saying about the ultimate truth is not right, because I know that these things are real. These flowers on my table are real. They're there. I can see them. And the yogic is not going to be faced with that. They can say, no, it's not that case, actually. They appear, but they don't really exist. So that's the yogic people. The yogic practitioners are able to confute or refute the ordinary people. But even with yogis, there are different levels of yogis, right? So due to distinctions of intellect, the higher yogis confute the lower. So you've got different levels of understanding that come along the path. When you first start practicing and you learn that everything is impermanent, suffering, selfless, and empty in the basic teachings of the foundation vehicle, and you learn that, then that actually gives you a better understanding than regular ordinary people. And so that's a level of yogic understanding. And then there are greater levels of yogic understanding as you go through the path. So as you go through you understand, and so each level of understanding is a degree of insight. It's a degree of yogic understanding, but it's not yet the whole understanding, right? So when you have the beginning, like if you begin your meditation on shamatha and you realize that all the things that are coming through your mind and are happening in your mind, that you don't actually have to follow them, that's like one of the beginning levels. It's a good level of yogic understanding. Then it gives you some freedom. Then you understanding that everything, gain a better understanding about the impermanence of all phenomena and so forth. And as you go with a greater and greater understanding, then your understanding is like, what do we say? It's further and further beyond that of regular ordinary people. So this are the higher yogis. But the understanding of like someone who has realized the impermanence of all phenomena in an intellectual way is different than someone who's actually seen the nature of all phenomena, like a bodhisattva, someone on the first bodhisattva level who's seen the nature of emptiness. But the nature of someone on the first level, on the level of the bodhisattva, is even less than someone is pretty paltry compared to even someone on the second level of bodhisattva level, and so forth, all the way up to Buddhahood. So you've got different levels of people. So what this is telling us is that we go in stages. You go practice in stages. You learn a little bit. You do the practice and go through the stages. And as you go through, you get better and better understanding. And the higher understanding is generally more valid, more authoritative than the lower understanding. But sometimes you say, well, how does that happen? So there are objections to this idea. Like, well, how can you actually do this? Because if you say that everything's emptiness, then how can you convince other people? Well, you use analogies that everyone can accept. But you don't worry about the nature of the analogy. For example, when you want to talk about everything being emptiness, not truly existing, the nature of the relative and the ultimate, the relative is the appearance, and there is consistency of cause and result in appearances, but the nature is the ultimate. Ultimately, the appearances do not really exist. Then you say, what is it like? Well, it's like a dream. Because when you have a dream, the appearances are happening and there's some consistency to the appearances and they feel you experience them, they're vivid. Or that's the traditional analogy. The analogy these days is when you're watching a video, you're watching Netflix. Do people still watch Netflix? Okay, so Netflix, I'm not too far out. So if you're watching Netflix, you're watching your story, you get involved in the story, right? What are you watching? You're looking at a screen. It's made out of glass and there are little dots of light on it but you look at it and you think this is a character. This is, I don't know, some dragon, Game of Thrones or whatever it is that you're watching on it. And so you think that it's real and you get involved in it. Even if you know that it's not quite real, you still have some sort of degree of involvement of it, but it's not really true. But you experience it as if it is. When there's a really suspenseful moment in a movie, you get like really, oh, what's going to happen? Or you might start to cry. There's no reason to cry. It's just some random sounds and dots on a screen. There's nothing real about it. So what this shows is that we can still see things and perceive them as being existent, perceive things without them being real. Similarly to the appearances in a movie, the appearances in our life. The appearances in a movie come because of causes and conditions. You've got the data on the server, you've got all the internet, you've got the TV, and lots of things going on in between that I'm not going to try to explain to all of you because I'd fail at it, I'm sure. There are causes and conditions that make these appearances, and then your whole sensory apparatus that then that comes into your eyes and your ears, and then your mind puts it all together in images, and then you've got this experience. Causes and conditions creating the experience. Similarly, in our daily life, there are all these appearances that we think are true, but they're just different interdependent things coming together and looking to us. But they seem like they're true, but they're not really. So you use analogies, but you don't examine the analogy too much, because for someone who's for the middle way, the Netflix analogy doesn't work because the TV's not real, the computers are not real, none of it's all emptiness. You cannot really say that there's a TV here. You can't say that it's not here. You can't say anything about it at all ultimately. So if you examine it, the analogy doesn't work for the middle way, but you still use it because you know it works for other people. You know they understand it, even if it ultimately is not the case. So as worldly people think that things are real just as they are perceived and not illusory, the yogis dispute the worldly over this. So what we're talking about in this is worldly people think that things are real. You look at things and you think it's real. You know, you've got a feeling, you feel pain or you feel sick, you feel like it's real. You feel hungry, you think that it's real. There's some real hunger. You think that that food that satisfies it is going to be real. We think that all of these things are real. And so, and as a result, we get attached to that food. The standard baking, I have to use my Portland analogies as usual, right? The standard baking company, you know, frangipane tarts or whatever you're going to be looking at, right? You look at that and you say, oh, that's, you're attached to it because there's a certain level where you think it's real and you think it's going to satisfy your hunger, right? You don't see it as just causes and conditions. So the middle way, the yogis aren't going to say, of course, you know, there's the appearance of a frangipane tart from the standard baking company. And there's the appearance of it tasting good, but is it real? No. So we're not going to argue on the level. When we're talking about the Madhyamaka, it's really important for it to understand that we're not talking about saying nothing exists, everything is nothingness, there's nothing at all. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that the nature of things is not solid, singular. It's not stable the way you think they are. Things do not exist the way you think they are. And so by overcoming our habitual ways of thinking about things, then we can overcome our fixations on them, and then we can free ourselves from suffering. That's the point. So we're not going to, no one's going to say that there are no appearances in this world. And if people who say this, then they're misunderstanding the middle way. It's not the right understanding. The yogis aren't going to say it. Someone who really understands the middle way is not going to dispute the world, dispute this. So yes, things appear. The question is, what is that nature? It's like an illusion. It's like a dream. When you wake up from it, you have a dream. You wake up from the dream, and it's done. When you're watching Netflix and the internet stops, or your computer goes out, or you turn it off, you close the window, it's gone. It's done. It's the same. There's nothing real there. You're looking at a character on the screen in Netflix, and then you turn it off, the character's gone. Causes and conditions have stopped. And when the causes and conditions stop, then the appearance stops. Right? But there's nothing real about the appearances of the world. I think I want to go through just one more verse. Oh, actually, maybe not. Maybe I'll leave that for tomorrow. This is maybe enough for tonight when we get into all these different things. We'll have gone through the first 5 verses tonight. So let's see. I wonder if at this point, we have a few more minutes. We're scheduled to go through 8:15. Is that right? So we have a couple of minutes. So we have some time for questions, and we can do the questions, maybe people live or people over Zoom. Sometimes over Zoom, it's handy for people to type in questions and comments, and then I'd read it out. Or people who are live, if you have questions. So does anyone have any questions at this point? Yes.
You've said the word real so many times, I think I forgot what it means.
What do we mean by real? That's actually a very good question. So generally, when we see something, we think it's real. Actually, the word for thing and the word for real and the word for existent are all the same in Sanskrit. You think that it exists, right? And generally, we think of it as being singular, like a whole thing. Like, for example, there's this glass that's underneath this napkin on my table. The people on the Zoom are not seeing. We've got my microphone case, so that people on Zoom can also see. All right. And you think that this is a single case. It's real. There's one case. And it endures. It lasts for a period of time. Of course, at some point, after a few years, it's going to turn, get a little bit tatty, but it's real and it endures. And it's going to be the same when it's tatty, then it's going to be the same case as it is today. That's the way we think about things. We think about them basically as being singular, permanent, or enduring. We think about them as either being, often we think about things as being blissful or and being autonomous. We think that this doesn't depend upon anything else, right? That's what we think. So we think that there's some identity of this microphone case that is real. But is there? I mean, because when you open up the microphone case, and I have to make sure that the other parts of the microphone don't fall out when I do this. So I have to close the zipper. So you open up the microphone case and you see it's just a bit of foam. There's some mesh, there's a zipper on the outside, there's a case with fabric over it. There's stuff that we can't see, and I'm not going to take it apart because I got to put my microphone back after this session, right? So it's actually a bunch of different things put together. So it's not singular. And then in terms of like, is it enduring? Well, I just spoke about it. I know, I mean, this is still relatively new. I've only had this for like 5 months, 6 months. 5 months, 6 months, something like that. I've had it for 5 and 6 months. It still looks pretty good, but as I carry it around in my bag, even if I try to be careful of it, I know that in a number of years, it's just going to get scuffed. The zipper might break, whatever, So it's not permanent. It's not enduring. It's actually changing all the time. And when you think about it, even on if you think about it in terms of contemporary physics, you've got all sorts of particles that are coming together and falling apart all the time. So there's nothing enduring there. It's just always changing. And it's not autonomous because it's not depends on other things. It depends on me to lift it for one thing. It depends on me to carry it. It depends on the materials that were put together to make it. It's not a single thing. It depends upon you who are looking at it to have a sensory impression of it, right? So it depends on all of us. It's because of all of us like this. And there's this whole number of other things, factors that far more than we can possibly list. I mean, in some level, you could say it's related to just about everything else in the world, right? So it's not autonomous. So this is what we're saying by real and what we mean by not real, right? Yeah,
it's kind of like it's defined by our interaction with it.
Well, one aspect it is it's kind of like it's defined by interaction. But do all of you on Zoom, can you all hear the questions as well? Yes. Okay, excellent. I just want to make sure that everyone can hear. So our interaction is part of it. It's defined by what we call interdependence. Interdependence is that everything depends upon other things to come together and create appearances. And interdependence is one way of looking at interdependence is that all the appearances. Another way of looking at interdependence is that it's emptiness, because there's nothing really there, just causes and conditions coming together and falling apart, reassembling in every moment. Yes.
Is the true nature of reality or basic nature, is it beyond being compounded though? I mean, is there anything that is not interdependent?
Is there anything that is not interdependent? As Nagarjuna said, because there is no dharmadal that is not interdependent, therefore there is no dharmadal that is not emptiness. So all phenomena are interdependent, like my microphone case. It's interdependent. That means it's also emptiness. But there's no emptiness, because sometimes we think about it, we think that the ultimate and the relative are somehow separate, and there's a ultimate that is separate from the relative appearance. Well, where? There's not. There's no ultimate, because if there were, then the two truths would not be unified, but they are. As I was saying at the beginning, you cannot find the ultimate anywhere the ultimate truth anywhere other than in the relative. You have to go through the relative or the conventional truth to be able to find the ultimate, and the ultimate is not other. If it were other, then that would be rather difficult. So no, it's not. There's nothing. There's basically emptiness and interdependence are synonymous. Okay. Any other questions? Anyone online have a question? Do I see any? Yes.
Okay, I'm still working on emptiness. So, I'm gonna ask you a few questions. I can try to get a better handle on it. So, emptiness is a quality, is this a true statement? Emptiness is a quality of ultimate and relative?
Emptiness is a quality of the ultimate and the relative. Emptiness is not a quality. Because if emptiness is a quality, there has to be something. Oh, sorry, I have to unmute. How did I mute? Okay. If emptiness were a quality, then it'd have to be a quality of something. But if no thing can be observed, then what could it be a quality of? Like, for example, it's a quality of this piece of fabric, the quality of the fabric that it's white, right? That's a quality of the fabric. If there's no fabric to be white, you can't have the quality. So when you look at things ultimately, you can't say that they exist, you can't say that they don't exist, and so what is there to have a quality?
Okay, that neither exists or do not exist. Is that the empty nature of ultimate?
The ultimate, it's getting there, yes. Yes, that is what we would call and when we talk about it in conventional terms, yes, we'd say it doesn't exist, it doesn't not exist, it doesn't both exist and not exist, it doesn't neither exist nor not exist. It's not any of the four extremes, right? So it's you can't say it's a thing, you can't say it's nothing, you can't say it's neither of those, you can't say it's both. And that's the ultimate.
That would be discrete, non-dual nature.
Yes. Well, I mean, the ultimate, when you talk about the ultimate nature, the non-dual nature, the empty nature, and so forth, these are all different terms for the same thing, depending upon what you're talking about it. When you talk about it in terms of being the non-dual nature, you're talking about in terms of non-dual wisdom that would perceive the non-dual nature. So you're talking about sort of that aspect from the wisdom aspect. When you're talking about emptiness, we're talking about it more from the we're emphasizing more the empty aspect rather than the wisdom aspect. But the wisdom and the emptiness are actually inseparable.
So, emptiness and space. Okay, would it be correct to say that space is empty?
Yes.
Okay, but emptiness is more than space.
Well, emptiness, when you want to give an analogy for emptiness, then the best analogy we have for it is the analogy of space. Because when you think about it, you have the analogy of space is basically, it's hard to tell what space actually is. Space is really, when we think about space, it's defined between two different things. Like there's the space between my hands. Well, if you look for the space between my hands, well, where is it? You can't find it. So it's like that, but space is inert. It's inanimate, it's inert, there's nothing there. Emptiness is a little bit different when we're talking about the emptiness that is a Dharma nature, the nature of all phenomena. It's also related to our cognition, to our awareness, to our wisdom, and so forth. And so emptiness is a little bit more than just inert space. There's something more about that. Siddha Rinpoche actually often speaks about this. It's like empty nature is the best analogy for it is, of course, the space, but it's a little bit different in the fact that it's more than that. It's not inert. It's also got all the inanimate. It's because it's got the whole play of interdependence, including our minds.
So is Dharmakaya, okay, let me phrase this differently. Is it true or correct to say that Dharmakaya is more than emptiness?
No. No. It's just a different word emphasizing a different aspect of it. When we're talking about the ultimate empty nature of all phenomena, you know, as opposed to the emptiness of a glass. Yeah. Okay, let's see. We've got one online, and
It's a little tricky. I need to mute you just.
Okay, I will mute myself.
All right. And turn up.
Okay. I'll turn down mine. I have to turn down my volume. Okay, now go ahead.
Sorry for all that work for just some, I was just gonna say that I couldn't hear her question.
Well, hang on a moment. We're having technical problems.
Try now.
Okay. I was just saying that I couldn't hear the question that you were answering.
Oh, hang on a second. We're having trouble. Can you mute this microphone also and then turn it way up? Okay, try again.
I was just simply, all that work for, I was just simply saying I don't know if others could, but I couldn't hear Kathy's question that you were answering, so.
Okay, so I will try to be, I thought you could hear them better. So I will try to be better about repeating questions. Okay, so is that it? Online and offline? Online and live? Or do we have looks like there's a message from Patrick Jung, but it's going to that chat. So one message, Patrick, could you resend your message to my screen rather than the Vajra Vidya Portland? Okay, I think we are going to get a message in just a moment. Oh, here we are. Oh, the schedule. The schedule is according to Portland, Maine time, not Portland, Oregon. So we're on the East Coast, Eastern Standard Time. So a number of you are listening from the West Coast. So sorry about that. It wasn't clear in the announcement. It's Portland, Maine, not Portland, Oregon. So tomorrow morning, the first session starts here at, what are we starting at, 10 o'clock? Or are we 10:30? 10. So it's going to be bright and early for all of you on the West Coast. 7 a.m. You'll have some middle way for breakfast. Okay. So I think maybe that's enough for this evening, and we will resume tomorrow with the objections to the middle way. So we will, once again, we'll recite the closing prayers, and we will begin by with the long life prayer for the Yelwan Karmapa, and then the long life prayer for the for Trungpa Rinpoche, and then dedication prayers. So share screen. Okay. You all have it in your books? Gyaku Ninja, right? Vajra Ninja Rangsu Karma Pa Jagun Chile Chidu Karma Pa 작은 돈손 왕국 갈마바 온전로로 죄내샤den서 사매예시담배드지니 지메체봉바치베즈 냠예 송주 자길레즌바 제왕은 베개에서 지메라 외계견체로신 롱도주지유라시제바 개진조배 만생계치니조시소 자랑자세 도시남당 성주 바나기도 나의 하상계 된덕이 지질문 바게네로요르치. That's one time through. I actually have it 3 times in the on-screen presentation, but since we did it with the melody, we'll just move on to Lama Kuhan Sangwar Solwa De Chodu Kutse Ringwar Solwa De Chinle Tarashin Yela Solwa De Lama Tanja Me Jinji Bade Lame Shabe Tembaram Kanyam Yola Degi Jongwaram Tashe Maru Tsosa Tripchane Nuradu Sanje Sala Gumba Sho Ema Sar Sanje Na Tayyam So Chambo Yun Samba Tujen Tanam La Sanje Janzen Bande Kojingur Dejing Otar Bade Me Bayi Dewan Chinshe Janre Shinkam Der Dani Dine Tsebe Jurmata Kewan Shengi Parma Chuparam Dero Jene Nangte Shatong Sho Deke Dagi Mananda Badi Choju Sanje Janzen Tamje Gi Geme Ruba Jinje Lavdozo Tadya Tam Pensanjya Abeda Nayeso Jodeya Seje Gong Tsoni Zolaji Ram Dagi Dusum Gesaba Kunjo Sumla Chepamu Yahweh Tamba Pejuji Gawa Sanjay Kunamo Drogun Sanjay Topjurji Geza Tamji Chitude Dagi Jula Ninjuji Tune Danim Zozote Tsere neme nyamdo pe tsendere sajo nan yorje. Namshi tsebe jurma ta dewa jende ke yorje. Kene peme kache te luden de la sanje sho. Chanchu tomne jisi do jimpe do jemba jo. Sonam de tanje se bani tomne nye bedra panche Kegana Chiba Choi Sibe So Le Do Sho. By this merit may I attain omniscience, defeat the enemy, wrongdoing and free all wanders from the ocean of the existence, churned by great waves of birth, age, sickness, and death. Okay, thank you all very much. Thank you all of you who are listening online. So I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Okay, so I guess I have to leave the meeting.
Thank you, Khenpo.